Mr. European Commissioner, Mr. Minister of Finance, on behalf of the social partners and National Economic Council of Belgium, I thank you very much for accepting our invitation to this debate on European fiscal and economic governance. Since several months, the Central Economic Council has started a broad debate on public finances and the European fiscal framework. We have set up a specific methodology to open the debate to civil society. Firstly, we organized a series of seminars with many academics of different institutions and countries, Gillet, Prat, Sapir, Darvas, Blanchard, Pisani, and so on, and with some representative of the Commission, of the European Fiscal Board, and the Central Bank of the Netherlands and Belgium. The seminaries allowed for exchange between expert and social partners, as well as a large audience. All information is available now on the Council website. Secondly, under the supervision of a group of academic experts, we have written a scientific report presenting the main evaluation of the European fiscal governance, as well as proposal for improvement. Thirdly, on the basis of this report, the social partners submitted an opinion on desirable changes to European fiscal governance. Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Minister, we are looking forward to hearing the European Commission proposal and the position that Belgium will defend. Mr. Commissioner, we have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Monsieur le Président. Dear Vincent, pleasure to be here. Bonjour à tous. Hey, Doug. Let me thank le Conseil Central de l'Économie for this conference, which is very timely because we tabled our proposal just a couple of weeks ago. The attempt is to reconcile three different imperatives with this proposal. First, strengthening national ownership and building a new common framework, so ownership and common framework. Simplifying our rules and preserving their intelligence, and supporting growth and enhancing debt sustainability. So growth and debt sustainability together. Let me try to explain how. First, the revised framework would increase national ownership by providing greater leeway to member states when designing their fiscal trajectories. Concretely, member states would need to propose medium-term fiscal structural plans outlining the country's fiscal path, as well as reform and investment commitments. Member states' fiscal trajectories should take into account a common EU framework that has sustainable growth and risks to debt sustainability as a common basis. The plans should ensure that public debt remains or goes down to prudent levels and that deficits respect the 3% of GDP threshold. This remains unchanged. This common framework would ensure transparency and equal treatment between member states. Equal treatment does not exclude but demands differentiation across member states in line with their actual and prospective public debt situation, which is very different from country to country. In this respect, the Commission would put forward a reference fiscal adjustment path for member states, reference, with substantial and moderate public debt challenges. Crucially, member states could also put forward a set of reform and investments commitments that could underpin a longer and even more gradual adjustment path. So through reform and investment commitment, you have a longer adjustment path. And this would be subject to common and transparent EU criteria. Second, the revised framework should simplify the rules and focus on fiscal risks. This means differentiating between countries according to their public debt challenges. We know how different they are, and we cannot ignore these differences. They are much higher than when the treaties were signed. You know that this 60% threshold was, at the time, the average debt of the countries signing the treaties. Now, if you look to the average debt, it's 92, 93%. So quite higher. And not only because of COVID, because the path was we can't ignore these differences. And ultimately, what matters for debt sustainability is that member states reduce public debt ratios in a plausible, gradual, and sustained manner. In other terms, it's the trajectory that matters also for financial markets, not the 60% that, of course, we are not changing and touching, because this is why we believe we should move away from the unrealistic requirements imposed by the 1/20th debt reduction rule introduced in 2011 in response to a very different crisis. A single indicator based on the evolution of primary expenditure would be used for setting the fiscal adjustment path and carrying out annual fiscal surveillance. This would significantly simplify the framework and increase transparencies, because another criticism during all these years was that the structure of our fiscal rules was too complicated and non-observable, so based on non-observable tools and criteria. Third, enforcement at EU level would be strengthened. This would be the counterpart to a more gradual and realistic reduction of the debt, and to providing more leeway to member states in designing their own fiscal trajectory. So in one side, you have more gradual and more designed by member states path. On the other hand, exactly because you have a more differentiated and own path, you can have stronger enforcement. So there is a balance between these two aspects. Of course, robust escape clause would still be needed to address exceptional situations, in addition to the general escape clause for use in cases of severe economic downturn, the one that we used after the COVID. A country-specific escape clause would allow for temporary deviation from the medium-term fiscal path in case of exceptional circumstances at national level outside the control of the government. Finally, the next steps, the Commission has put forward a package. In my view, it's a balanced package, and it was not easy also within the Commission to find a common agreement, but here it is. We found it, and it is strongly supported by all the Commission. Let me also thank le Conseil Central de l'Économie for its contribution to the debate, as well as the Belgian authorities for their constructive approach. That is always the approach of the Belgian government and Vincent personally. I believe you have a good starting point for discussion to move towards a swift agreement we will have a first discussion already next Tuesday during the ECOFIN. But a reform along the lines we have set out would require legislative changes. That is why in the coming months we will consider tabling this legislative proposal, following, of course, the process of discussion in the Council and among member states. In the first quarter of 23, we will also provide guidance for 24, reflecting, among others, our orientations for a reform of the fiscal framework, provided a sufficient degree of convergence across member states is achieved by that time. So I believe that the new realities and challenges we are confronted with actually make a reform of the economic governance not less but more urgent. We have massive investment needs to support the twin transition, energy security, defense, European competitiveness. And at the same time, we also face a new reality of higher public debt. So we have these two mountains, the mountain of the public debt and the mountain of the investments that we need. And we can't choose one against the other. We have to address both in the coming years. Investments and debt are both fundamental challenges. We need fiscal rules that both facilitate strategic investment and safeguard fiscal sustainability. 30 years ago, Jacques Delors spoke of the great determination, rock-hard solidarity, and a little daring from time to time that were necessary to agree on the Maastricht Treaty. And it was difficult to agree to the treaty 30 years ago. Now, I think we have to unite behind the inseparable goals of reducing debt and achieving sustainable growth with the same spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dear President, dear Commissioner, dear Paolo, dear ladies and gentlemen. Maybe I don't say it enough when we are in a Eurogroup or ECOFIN meeting, but it's always a pleasure to have Paolo in the room. So I'm glad as well today that you are here, Paolo. Thank you very much. I think it's also a nice opportunity to discuss very important issues that we have, especially with respect to our public finances. And again, I think it's nice to always hear your views and your fair analysis you're always making during the Eurogroups and today probably as well during the discussion that we will have afterwards. And you probably also have known or seen that or noticed that public finances are at the moment quite hot in Belgium. I think that's the first time in history that the discussion and the opinion on the Belgian draft budgetary plan had so much attention, and actually, to be honest, rightly so, because of course, the public finances deserve all our attention and should be also a key concern because, of course, the decisions that we make today will have an impact and an important impact tomorrow. And therefore, I also would like to thank you, President, for organizing this debate. And of course, I would also like to thank all of you for being here. And before turning on the economic governance discussion, let me maybe first say a few words on the discussion and the much discussed Commission report, because there were actually mainly two major remarks on our draft budgetary plan. The first one was that our energy measures should be more targeted. And a second one is, of course, that we need to limit the growth of our primary expenditures. With respect to the first remark, I think that we also should be honest and say that, let's say, 70% of the European energy support has been untargeted. So this is not only a Belgian deficiency. And the fact that many governments have chosen to support their people and businesses in an untargeted manner is, of course, not really a surprise. I mean, we also discussed at the previous Eurogroup and ECOFIN meeting with the other colleagues, we should say that theoretically, we of course all want targeted measures. We all want income-related measures because these measures have the least impact on our budgets and do not prevent the price signal from lowering energy demand. But in reality, of course, during the height of the energy crisis, the speed of measures was key. As governments, we were facing a trade-off between quick and targeted measures, but quickly implementing support measures was most needed in order, of course, to support our families, in order to support our companies, and also to calm growing social unrest. And with respect to the second remark, I think that's an important one. The need to limit our primary expenditure growth. This is also much more a concern to me, because whilst the temporary energy support measures are partly linked to the speed of action required, the uncontrolled growth of our primary expenditures is of course linked to structural deficiencies. And ever since I became minister in this government, I have been highlighting the importance of structural reforms for this country to actually structurally tackle the deficiencies of our labor market, of our pension system, and also of our tax system. It's a concern that is also shared by the IMF. It's also shared by the European Commission. And in the latest report, it is clearly stated that Belgium needs to prioritize reforms. I think that's there was a clear message that was given, because these reforms are needed now, not only to increase, of course, the people's purchasing power, but also because we needed them in the long run to strengthen our economy, to strengthen our society, and also to keep our welfare state more resilient. And when looking, for example, at the pace at which our society is aging, it is clear we need to improve the budgetary sustainability of our long-term care system and pension system in order to sustain those crucial building blocks of our welfare system. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, these reforms are not only needed at the national level, they also needed at the European level. And there, especially at the moment where, of course, the economic forecast are surrounded by a lot of uncertainties, we as politicians also should provide clarity. We should prepare ourselves also for the long run. That's what our citizens and our customers, companies, expect from us. But also, and especially the financial markets, they need a long-term perspective on where we are heading to. And therefore, I'm indeed very pleased to be here with Paolo, to be here with you, to discuss that economic governance review, because that's an important reform that is actually needed at the European level. Our EU budgetary framework was, as Paolo said, created some 30 years ago with the signing of the Maastricht Treaty on the 7th of February 1992. And the budgetary rules at that time were actually based on an important principle, and it was counter-cyclicality, spending more during crisis and building buffers during growth. And today, I believe we all should acknowledge that those rules weren't actually followed the past decades. During the times of economic prosperity, the European Union and its member states haven't built up sufficient buffers. And after the 2008 financial crisis, we also saw that the austerity-based approach made member states cut their spending by putting much needed productive investments that had a focus on the longer term on the back burner and delaying actually the reforms that were necessary as well. And therefore, the European budgetary rules need a serious update. I'm really convinced on that, but without questioning the ultimate goal of the European fiscal rules, and it is sustainable debt levels in the medium and long term. But we need to make sure that governments can continue to finance themselves on the market at reasonable rates, and that we do not pass on the financial burden to future generations. But it is clear that we are not achieving our targets under the current fiscal rules because the current rules are insufficient. First of all, because there is the focus that is solely on the debt reduction, and it's neglecting also the importance of productivity and future economic growth for the sustainability of our public finances. Also because the current rules are too complex. No one fully understands the overflow of parameters and matrices. We need realistic rules that people understand. And thirdly, we also need realistic rules that are fit for the current economic reality, because the pace at which member states should reduce their debt levels to the 60% benchmark, the so-called 120th rule, is making strict compliance today unachievable. So the economic governance review as presented by the Commission is very timely and very welcome. And I certainly welcome the commitment-based approach of the Commission, where member states will have the possibility to present a medium-term fiscal plan when it's accompanied by a package of reforms and investments. This not only creates more ownership for member states, which is important, but it also encourages member states to see debt reduction, investments, and reforms as one package for increasing the resilience of their economies. Because in addition to a healthy budget, we also need a strong economy, and a strong and resilient economy will also reduce future debt levels. I support also that the Commission is looking at the RRF mechanism in this context. This will create more ex-ante flexibility by governments, giving the governments a possibility to adjust their debt trajectory and set up an investment and reform package according to their own priorities. But ex post, of course, this RRF mechanism will also enhance compliance with the debt reduction trajectory. And I also welcome the multi-annual approach because medium-term fiscal plans increase the incentive for governments to develop a long-term vision rather than, to be honest, the current emphasis on meeting targets on an annual basis. And of course, even though the Commission is giving us a clear way forward, there are still some open questions and some questions remaining. For example, how will this new fiscal framework be implemented in countries like Belgium with a federal structure? But also at the technical level, there are some questions that, of course, remain. For example, looking at into the debt sustainability analysis and the proposed spending rule. But this additional information will clearly help us to define the Belgian position in the coming months. And to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I think that European fiscal surveillance based on debt reduction is important, but has shown to be insufficient. The upcoming reform on the European fiscal rules will only succeed if it is a threefold, with a focus on, of course, the debt reduction, but also on investments and on reforms. And therefore, I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we will have in the coming weeks and months at the Eurogroup level, but also, of course, at the national level, and especially here today and this evening with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Allow me to summarize in a few words the opinion of social partners here. The main elements of the social partners' opinion are improve the estimation of the potential growth in combining multiple models, replace the structural balance with an indicator of net expenditure, replace the debt reduction rule with a country-specific debt reduction trajectory, depending on the sustainability of the public debt and the economic cycle of each country, finance and co-finance transnational investments and green investment on European level with an increased budget, and create a permanent central fiscal capacity as a stabilization instrument complementary with the European monetary policy. In comparison with the Commission's proposal and the opinion of the social partners, we can conclude that reference is made to the concept of net primary expenditure instead of the concept of structural balance. It's very good. And reference is made to a country-specific trajectory of public debt reduction. However, it seems that there is no reference made to a golden rule for investment or to the possibility of strengthening the fiscal capacity of the European Union, even if the Commission and you, Mr. the Commissioner, urges to the need, to increase productive public investment and to face the challenges of the transition. If you agree, we will now proceed to the question from our members.
But indeed, on investment, we have questions. They don't seem to be privileged in the new rules, and we all know it's always a danger if the budget is under pressure that governments look at long-term investments as an easy way to cut expenditures. So that's a danger that is not answered, I think. Then on the debt level, the treaty won't be changed. We have realized it would be difficult to change the treaty. But still, if you have the 60% rule, the question is, till what level will we have to reduce debt? Is Belgium on a trajectory of debt reduction for the coming 30 or 40 years? Not to mention other countries with a larger debt. So this is a question, or will this remain purely symbolic, and will we look actually at debt reduction in a way that is feasible? And then on the fiscal capacity that was mentioned, it is linked to possible sanctions that if you don't follow the trajectory, the Commission will be more consequent in sanctions. But if you don't have a budget that you can retain, how can you be effective in sanctions? With the RRF, it's simple. If a country doesn't commit to its what it has promised, the payment can be withheld. But if you don't have a budget, how will you do that? It's quite unimaginable to think about cohesion funds that wouldn't be paid, because then you punish the people and not the government. So that's these are some questions.
I would say three things. First, investments are incentivized and supported in our proposal. Maybe we are not explaining it sufficiently. Maybe we should strengthen this part during the discussion. But in my view, the mechanism is quite simple. Let's take the golden rule as a comparison. What is the golden rule? Of course, it is not a mechanism to cancel the debt, because you are not canceling the debt with the golden rule. It is a mechanism of a different accounting of some expenditure for investments. So it is a different treatment that you give to investments to incentivize them. In this proposal, which is still at the stage of orientation, so needs to be, of course, qualified and transformed in legislative proposal, what we consider is to incentivize investments gaining time and graduality in the process of reduction of the debt. So you pass from a 4 years plan to a 7 years plan, but you have the same problem to define that you would have with a golden rule. And the problem is what kind of investments. So what are the priorities that we establish and we decide in common, justifying this result? You choose this kind of investment, you are gaining time. You are not gaining a different accounting method. You are gaining time, but of course, gaining time means to have an impact in your debt reduction trajectories. And different accounting is important, not because it cancels the debt, but because it gives to your debt profile towards the European authorities a different form. Why we choose this and not a golden rule? Well, I think you know that there is the golden rule in itself is very controversial. So we have been looking for different ways to reach the similar goal. And by the way, this was also something that in Belgium was discussed in the previous years, to look to different ways to reach the same goal of the golden rule. So we have now to define better. For example, several member states are asking to include in the priorities spending for defense. There are 12 member states, I think, that wrote a letter on this. Not easy, honestly, in my view. Something is obvious, green investments, some other will be necessarily defined. We have a framework, which is the RRF, but we have to. So my view is that we are encouraging investments in a different way than the golden rule. If this is not sufficiently underlined, we have to explain it better and maybe also to be more precise when we will have our proposals. 60%, as I said in my initial remarks, what is crucial for us and especially for the financial markets is the trajectory. So we want to have in this 4-7 year times, and then for the following 10 years. So in reality, the period is a 17-year period. We want to have a very realistic and gradual path of reduction. We don't want in these 17 years to reach a threshold, being the threshold 60 or 90 or whatever. We want to see a realistic gradual reduction. Of course, the reduction for Italy will be different from the reduction of a country that has 90% of debt. Italy is around 140%. Of course, it will be different. We can't change the threshold of the treaties. Someone proposed, as you know, Klaus Regling proposed to pass from 60% to 100%. And in fact, if the logic was the average of the signing countries, 100% would have been realistic. But I think nobody would spend political capital in changing the treaties now. Impossible. We keep this 60%. Yes, it is there. Nobody is canceling it. But we change the rule that is providing a guidance on how to reach this 60%, which is the famous rule of the debt. Finally, on sanctions, as I said in some occasion, we try to make them lighter because, again, in the logic of the rules that we have, sanctions are very tough. And the idea was that they would have been a deterrent for countries. Such a tough sanction would avoid you to go against the rules. Then we saw that at least among the big member states, everybody broke the rule in the last 10, 15 years. Italy and Germany, France and Spain, I'm not following, but everybody broke the rule. So what I'm saying is that we are passing from nuclear to conventional sanctions, that meaning that it is not a deterrent, but it is a realistic thing that could be enforced. But by the way, the problem of the making possible the enforcement is the ownership, because it's your government that established a 4-year or 7-year plan. Then we negotiated, we approved it, and if you break it substantially, it's reasonable to enforce. I think also your public opinion can understand this. If it comes from general and a little bit far from the reality figures and rules, it is very difficult to enforce. By the way, nobody enforced it. Something that we are keeping is the 3% threshold, because it more or less, it functioned, it was respected, not sufficient to decrease the debt, but useful as a reference. So we keep it as it is.
Not much to add, of course, to this analysis, but maybe just with respect to the golden rule. I remembered a couple of, I think already a year and a half ago, I had a discussion with some of my colleagues about what kind of investments we should put under the golden rule. And so we started with green and digital, and we ended with the salaries of the teachers. And then also the social benefits, because they also provide a lot of support to the economic growth and so on. And so the context for such a golden rule is very difficult today. I also always give the example, there is a difference between the definitions we had on the golden rule before the invasion in Ukraine and after, because defense became much more important and the investments that countries and member states wanted to do. So at that point, I think, and that's the interesting thing in the proposal that is made by the Commission, is of course that the investments and the reforms are actually an important element in the opinion that is given and in the trajectory that can be proposed. But every trajectory is actually linked to the context of the member state. And that is so important. That means that investments in one country can be completely different than in other countries, but they have the same impact, namely that they can make more time to get or to come to the same result. So I understand the question on the golden rule, and it was a discussion that was there for a long time. But the way how the proposal of the Commission actually today is a little bit a golden rule, but the golden rule that is linked to the context of the member state itself.
Mr. Commissioner, you stressed the simplification, which is a good thing. And the focus on debt reduction. And you said, okay, we go to one way to measure it, the expenditure rule. Now, on the way the Commission is going to operationalize this, there is still some, the Commission itself, but also the Council has to give its opinion, etc. But coming to this rule, as we can see today, given the focus on debt reduction, might be harder than you present it. Debt reduction in Belgium, if you look at the autumn forecasts of the Commission of now 1 week ago or 10 days ago, the debt reduction is not yet there. So it has to be delivered, combined with a rule, expenditure rule, that is guaranteeing that we're going towards the direction of this 3%, which you still keep, and realizing this debt reduction. This means in reality, as far as it can be estimated today, an expenditure rule of say 1%, 1.5% net growth in a time of inflation. I don't know for 24, but most estimations are now talking about 3%, 2.5%. So we go to a net situation of expenditure growth below inflation. It's a realistic possibility. Given these goals, is the Commission going to come to the conclusion that Belgium and all its parts, we have many of them, come to a common path? Not so easy in itself, but let's say that we do, with a net growth rate below inflation in say 24 or 25. This seems not so easy, and we have a minister here who is very well specialized and without doubt very well able to answer that situation. But what is the possibility that the Commission is then going to say, to come to a conclusion, we have to adapt the Belgian forecast of its public financials. Or what is then possibly going to happen?
Is, well, first a discussion to build consensus. And I think that the Belgian contribution will be very important and, from this point of view. Second, if, as I imagine, a consensus is possible on this basis with some adjustments, as always, we will have maybe a sort of transitional interpretation based on the communication that we launched 2 weeks ago for the budgets of 2024, because it's very difficult to imagine that we have concluded the process, especially if we will have legislative changes before the design of 2024 budget. So meaning before end of summer of next year. For sure, we will not have concluded the process, but if there is sufficient consensus, as always, the Commission could have a transitional interpretation. Then when the new framework will be in place, what we expect is a program from Belgium or from other countries, a plan of 4/7 years, depending on the decision of using or not using this possibility of special attention to reformal investments, allowing the program to be 7 years. And in these 7 years, we expect to have a reduction, a path of reduction of the debt. The path of reduction of the debt will be very, of course, as I said several times, very gradual, but you can have also an overall reduction, no, meaning that not every year should have the same path of reduction of the debt. It depends on the plan of the country, of the government. We will discuss this using also our reference path, and then when we approve it, we go. Investments will be decided by member states, as Vincent said. We would like to have these decisions taking into account some common priorities, because I think that we need to have critical mass from European investment in some strategic issues, but that this is not, of course, so strict a recommendation. So this is what we expect, and well, I think that normally this, and I know very well the difficulties, the federal structure of Belgium, but normally to have this gradual reduction shouldn't be so difficult. Of course, circumstances are crucial. No, will we have? Let's imagine that this plan is presented and discussed in 2024. How high will inflation be in 2024, 2026? Very difficult to forecast now. Apparently, we are peaking. Crossing fingers, this is what appears, that inflation is peaking in this November, December, and then very slowly going down. But if this is not the case and we have extraordinary situation, for example, for inflation, we are proposing to give a better definition of this escape clauses, both at EU level and even at national level, because we can't exclude to have enormous, extraordinary circumstances at national level that undermines the possibility to keep the commitment of the plan. So I think we will have sufficient flexibility if we will have extraordinary circumstances, but overall to have a path mixing very gradual reduction of the debt and very strong push on investment and reform is quite possible for the country I know best, which is a country with high debt, and for Belgium that has a lower debt, but maybe a even more complicated institutional framework, of course. I think this is quite possible. And of course, we have to face the Vincent was referring to this in his initial remarks. We have to take under control the permanent increase of current expenditure. But this is something we have to do. This is not related to this or that proposal. Because you were right, Vincent, in saying that the problem of untargeted measure on energy is an overall problem. It's not a Belgian problem, not at all. But of course, the level of current expenditure is a problem of a certain number of member states. It's not so universal as the problem of untargeted energy measures, which is unfortunately general. My view, I don't know if you agree, Vincent, is that it is true that it is general, but now it is time to try to make them more targeted. Because we have the time to do so. We will have, I think, we can transform the measures that we have in more targeted measures in the coming months without the pressure of the events that you have to react immediately, put something on the table. I don't know if you agree, but I think, no, you don't agree.
But I like the way you work. You get a question from the person over there, and you actually at the end ask me what I think about something else. But I completely. Well, maybe first answer the question. The first question. I think indeed, and I also already mentioned in the beginning, the proposal that is now on the table still needs to be worked out. And I think that you raised some interesting concerns with respect to that expenditure rule. And you're right. When we look at in a country like Belgium with a federal structure, it will be very difficult, and that I think that will create some questions as well at our level, at our member state level, to see how we are going to deal with that. But these are things that we should discuss in the coming period. With respect to the numbers and what the goal should be, well, there of course. I follow what Paolo said, that it's important that we also should include reforms, and that we should look how we can include the needed investments that actually will help us, because that's exactly what we have seen the last couple of decades, that we are actually reducing our investment, reducing our reforms, just because of the fact that we wanted to keep that debt reduction level that we agreed on with the Commission or with Europe. So I really believe that in this discussion and in the proposal that is also presented, that holy trinity, let's say, of the reforms, the debt reduction and the investments is quite important, and answers a need that we have seen from the past decade. With respect to the remark of the question of Paolo, with respect to the targeted measures and the need for more targeted measures, of course, I agree, because of course we're also now in a situation with high inflation, and the European Central Bank is also making some monetary decisions, and we should avoid that we interfere with them with our with the measures that we take. But again, and that's, I think, just a concern, is that we need to avoid that we think that everything will be solved, or that the measure is targeted if we only look at, for example, the salary. I'm quite convinced that there are people, single moms with 3 children, that earn much more than someone else, who has less or more difficulties paying their bills than someone who earns and is a couple, and yeah. So it's very difficult to just compare based on the on salary, because we always use the salary as a proxy of if someone needs support or not. And that's a concern I have, and of course I agree with on the fact that we need to look at how can we make our support measures more targeted. But at the same time, we also need to avoid that people who really need it do not receive these measures. And to be honest, I also haven't seen much very good results or very good examples, excuse me, in other countries. We're always saying that they should be more targeted. You also mentioned it last time, or Valdis proposed it and showed the presentation where we saw 70-80% of the measures at the European level are untargeted. But to be honest, what can we then do? I think here in Belgium we have done an interesting reform of our energy bill that will come in place in the next period, which is our VAT reduction that will be replaced by excess duties, where we can actually make a difference between a basic package of energy, electricity or gas, and everything that you use to heat your swimming pool in your garden. That will also give us much more policy room for the next crisis, when the next time that our prices will be very high. So I think that is an important reform that we have done, and that makes our support measures more targeted. But in general, I must be honest that I think it's very difficult, and I also that it's very difficult just because we wanted to be that quick. And of course, today we will see what will happen. But if I look to the numbers and the percentage of our GDP that Belgium actually used to support our families and our companies, that's quite limited compared to other countries. For example, in Belgium, it's, I think, according to Bruegel, 0.85%, 0.85.
0.9 in our
0.9 in Italy, but I know, for example, in Germany, it's 7.5. Okay, yeah, 0.9, but in Germany, it's 7.5% of GDP support that they proposed. So I think that at that level, we were actually quite prudent with what we proposed and the support measures that we presented.
Another question, a last question.
Quick remarks. It's about current account deficit. We are, I think, in the proposal of the Commission, we are not talking about current account deficit or current account surplus, because it's the most important things in Eurozone. The imbalance between countries are more important than just fiscal or budgetary plan or something else. And I think the Commission is not focused on that point, but it's the heart of the crisis in the Eurozone. In the previous Eurozone, the most important matter was about the deficit in current accounts. the south have more deficit than the north, and I think it's a mistake to not taking into account for the proposal of the revision of the treaty.
Well, indeed, we address the issue in what we call the macro imbalance procedure, because I agree with you that this is crucial. We will try to use this imbalance procedure in a broader way. We de facto we already started this with this autumn semester package. I think we will have in-depth analysis for 17 countries on different issues. Traditional one like current accounts and new emerging issues like housing prices or other. So I fully agree with you. It's only that we address this with this kind of procedure, and we try to simplify the path of investment debt reduction using a single observable indicator. Will this be easy? Well, we will have legal problems with some countries because some countries have the structural balance in their own legal framework, Germany, for example, and we will have to verify the difficulties in other countries to use this. I just want to stress the fact that if there is something that was very largely suggested during our public consultation by academics, individuals, institutions, was exactly this, to use a single primary expenditure tool to observe the evolution. So I think this is a wise choice. At the same time, I seize the opportunity to, in answering to what the president was saying at the start, that indeed something is missing from this proposal, which is what we call a central fiscal capacity. And also this was very largely proposed during our public consultation. And we all know that to complete the monetary union, we will need a central fiscal capacity. But our choice was not to overburden our proposal, which is already not immediately easy in reaching an agreement with a with a substantial further proposal that in any case we will sooner or later put on the table, because if we want to complete the monetary union, if we want to have a real we address the problems of a central fiscal capacity every time in a different way. So it was Next Generation EU, now it is Ukraine, tomorrow I don't know what. And we are doing this with different tools, of course, having a central fiscal capacity, which doesn't mean in itself that this central fiscal capacity will have a redistributional target or a redistributional target in favor of certain countries and against other countries. because there is this connection. Central fiscal capacity means moral hazard and transfer from these to those. If we look to the differences from Repower EU and Next Generation EU, we see different allocation keys and different mechanisms of redistribution. The central fiscal capacity is a good thing in itself. It doesn't mean necessarily redistribution in the sense that some countries are concerned about. But this was a parenthesis because you mentioned it at the start.
Thank you.
Vincent.
Well, maybe just nothing to add to the question on the macro imbalance procedure, but with respect to the central fiscal capacity, I think the best way, or it will be important that our current system with the Next Generation EU will become a success, and if that is a success, that's the best driver to actually start something like that, and therefore. To be honest, I think that we now first, and that will still take a couple of years, that we first need to make a success of the Next Generation EU. We of course now all implemented, or almost all plans are agreed on, except one, I guess. So we are now started with the implementation at all different levels and all different member states. Sorry. And if we succeed in making a success of that, that will probably be a good first step in coming to a central fiscal capacity.
Completely agree. And this was also the tactical choice that we made to avoid to put it immediately on the table.
Thank you very much for your participation. With great attention, and given the challenges for public finance in Belgium, and big challenges for public finance, we also examine with experts in the Economic Central Council how to continue to debate on the basis of the Commission proposal. Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Minister.